Hey everyone, this is Yana Ludwig. I am running for United States Senate here in Wyoming, and I am coming at you live from my COVID-19 isolation place, and I hope that is where you are watching me from today. So I want to start out our usual Thursday routine with a COVID-19 update for Wyoming. Want to draw folks' attention to an important article in yesterday's Casper Star Tribune, which you might remember has been offering their COVID-19 coverage, which has been abundant and really well done for free. So definitely tune into the Star Tribune. This article featured Dr. Mark Dowell, and the title is Natrona County Health Officer, We Haven't Flattened Any Curve. While we may not be seeing as fast of growth in cases, he points out that it is likely a data collection problem. He calls it falsely low in the article, rather than a sign that we are through the worst of it in Wyoming. So, I know this isolation thing sucks for so many people, but please keep it up as best you can. We've now seen 2 deaths in Wyoming, and there will likely be more to come. So let's keep doing everything that we can to protect the people that we love. Governor Gordon has continued to strike some very sober notes in his communications recently. He said a couple days ago, if anyone thinks that simply easing restrictions currently in place will lead to an immediate return to normal, they need to think again. It is important to be honest about the economic challenges Wyoming will continue to face in both the short and long term. This will be a slow recovery. So, knowing that reality in your own words, Governor Gordon, I'm calling on you once more to put together a plan to free up some of our mineral funds that are there for a rainy day. And surely this is it. I mean, I know it's literally snowing, but this is actually a rainy day. And act to make sure that our small businesses are okay and that our people are not facing evictions and foreclosures. Only 69% of renters in the country were able to pay their April rent. The governor can act to not have a huge number of Wyomingites end up houseless and make sure that their rent is covered. We have the ability to do that, and I'm calling on Governor Gordon to go ahead and act. So, today's main topic is public lands. So, public lands are really important to me. I was basically that kid who spent their childhood kind of running wild in the woods. And my most important rejuvenation times in my 20s were solo backpacking trips, actually, most of them to national lakeshore areas. And while that habit scared the crap out of my mother, it also made me a public lands loyalist pretty much for life. I came to the Grand Teton National Park for the first time when I was 20. And my first cross country train trip, of which I have done many at this point, actually brought me through northern Wyoming on a passenger route that no longer exists. And on that trip, I declared Wyoming to be the most beautiful place in the country. And that opinion has never wavered for me. I also grew up in hunting and fishing culture. My family ate a lot of venison, we ate a lot of fish, and along with gardening and keeping bees, that direct relationship to the earth and that time spent out in the natural world were all things that shaped me really strongly. Now, I know as an adult now that having access to land is a privilege that not everybody has. And we are very, very fortunate to live in a state where public lands have been a priority and I think have shaped the consciousness of everybody who lives here. Protecting and expanding public lands is one of the most important reasons why we need to change who is representing us in DC and not change it to Cynthia Lummis. I'll get back to her record on this in a couple minutes, but I want to talk about why I think we all need public lands. So we need recreation that is economically accessible to everyone. I believe that humans have a need for nature in our lives and that being rich shouldn't be the criteria for being able to get that need met. Public lands are incredibly important for that. Everyone can go to parks, whether they are city parks, county parks, state and national parks, and nearly everyone can afford to go to even the most spectacular of those. And surely in the US, we need to count Yellowstone and Devil's Tower on that list of most spectacular places. And I'd also count my own most local and favorite place called Vitavu that is just right down the road from my house. Projects are also underway to increase the mobility access of many parks in the state so that people with disabilities can also fully partake. And we need to keep on that project. It's been of massive benefit to people already in the state, and we need to not stop that project now. So, hunting, fishing, hiking, camping, all of these are activities that I value deeply and have participated in at various stages in my life. And there's nothing that replaces those kind of activities. You can't fish online. You need land access for that. And all of those activities are kind of iconically Wyoming. To lose public lands is to undermine something unique and important for us culturally and I think psychologically here. Along with recreation comes greater economic stability. As the fossil fuel industry is starting to taper off, we need to make sure that we don't also have a loss of recreation jobs in the state. I've talked to folks in the National Park Service in the last couple of weeks, and they are well aware that COVID-19 is potentially going to affect their livelihood. This is a moment where I think we need to be standing really strong in our commitment to these workers and our national and state park systems in general. Now, in 2015, fossil fuel leases in Wyoming on federal lands produced 44 million barrels of oil and a lot of governmental revenue. We know that we need to make changes to this because of climate disruption. And the relationship between public lands and the climate is actually a pretty complex one. On the one hand, we have all of these fossil fuel leases right now. And on the other hand, public lands could actually be tremendously beneficial in terms of climate stabilization. And so that stabilization is another reason why I strongly support the maintenance and expansion of public lands. Forest and prairie lands help capture carbon from the atmosphere. It's not just about how much carbon we're emitting, it's also about how much plant material we have in the world that is counteracting that. And public lands can play a tremendous role in that. I'm proposing a law mandating the planting of 10 billion trees nationwide. While we need to make sure that the plants being planted in every region are appropriate species for that place, Wyoming could find itself with a lot of new jobs from that bill. We have space to be a major player in the implementation of that. And as one of the states predicted to be the least negatively affected by climate disruption, who knows if those predictions will be true or not, but if that is true, we could find ourselves with a fair number of climate refugees coming to our state. Good work can be had here doing good for the planet, and the fact that we have so much space right now is a huge asset in moving that forward. In order for land to be a net positive in terms of climate, though, we need to make sure that the activities happening on that land are carbon neutral at least. This means that we need to stop doing leases for fossil fuels and look away from cattle and toward buffalo and other less damaging species that are native to this land. Looking toward more integrated, ecologically sound methodologies for raising them. My brother is a cattle farmer in Michigan, and he's one of the people who's looking at permaculture-based ways to do that are far less damaging to the land and the climate. And, I'm saying all this as somebody who loves me a burger, and these are simply the scientific realities of land management at this point. So if we need to lease public lands for the income, and I don't think that that's an unreasonable or a bad source of income for governments, why not lease them for things like hemp and marijuana farms, for sustainable agriculture, for large-scale composting that can reduce the amount of methane emissions happening in our landfills, for wind and solar farms. Like all of those would be climate responsible uses of public lands and not do the kind of permanent damage to lands that fossil fuel extraction does. So as a quick side note, part of my childhood experience was working for my dad during the summers. My dad's an ecologist, and one of his lines of work was doing land reclamation work on mine sites. I can remember working with him in northern Wisconsin in this really beautiful rural area and walking on acres and acres of land that had been absolutely devastated by mining to the point of lifelessness. Our job was to bring it back to life. And that experience has left images of land wreckage burned into my brain. I would much rather see prairie land with windmills and buffalo grazing or acres of hemp swaying in the wind than anything like that ever again. My main opponent in this race is former Representative Cynthia Lummis, and she is not interested in things like ecologically sound leasing. Her idea for making a buck off of our public lands is for them to cease to be public. That is, in my mind, an irresponsible throwing away of an important resource for short term gain. So let's talk about Cynthia Lummis and how she relates to public lands for a minute. So Lummis is a founding member of a thing called the Federal Lands Action Group, or FLAG, which is a great example of Republicans' skill at naming things to sound quite nice, which are actually horrible. One of their members has advocated for, quote, devolving control over public lands away from the federal government and to those closer to the lands, which sounds kind of warm and fuzzy, doesn't it? But he includes privatization as FLAG's first option for how to get that land closer to those closer to the land. And who can afford to buy massive tracts of land? That would be the 1%, the people who have gotten rich profiting on people's labor, on the use of resources that they're not necessarily paying for the full benefit of. So if public lands are privatized, they are no longer public. They become inaccessible to the vast majority of us. And we have a lot less say over what is happening on that land. That is the world that Cynthia Lummis is all in for. It is a world with less access to recreation for most of us, less beauty as it gets destroyed for profit, less income for state entities who are already struggling, and less democratic control over our world. Lummis has made a lot of enemies among outdoor enthusiasts when she was in office, advocating for this kind of divestment of public resources. I will post a link to a Wildfile article that did a good job of laying that out at the time and was simply titled, Lummis Ignores Sportsmen and Her Wyoming Constituents. So let's not do more of that. When it comes to recreation as well as economic and climate security, Cynthia Lummis is not our friend. We need to elect somebody who will go to bat for all of these, and I commit to standing with public lands advocates to keep public lands in public hands. So thank you for tuning in and listening today. This Sunday's 1 p.m. virtual town hall is going to be called What is Socialism for Real? Join me for that conversation. We'll be on Zoom at 1 o'clock, and you can get tuned into that right here. Thanks so much, everybody. Let's keep public lands in public hands. Bye.